What happens when one of America's favorite talk show hosts faces off against a comedian known for testing limits? The result was explosive. Jeff Dunham, the ventriloquist who filled arenas around the world with his daring puppet acts, found himself in a clash no one expected. Kelly Clarkson, usually known for her warmth and optimism, revealed a sharper side that left the audience shocked and her guests storming off set. The air was tense, the exchange was biting, and what began as a lighthearted chat turned into one of daytime TV's most uncomfortable moments. This was not rehearsed or meant for attention. It was real, raw, and unforgettable. Before we get into what actually happened, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts below. Was Kelly too harsh, or did Jeff cross a line? The interview began like any other. Kelly entered her bright set to loud applause, flashing her familiar smile that fans loved. The crowd was excited for another episode filled with stories, music, and laughter. When Jeff Dunham's name was announced, the audience cheered even louder. Whatever people thought of him, his popularity was undeniable. He walked out confidently, puppet case in hand, and waved as the cheers grew. Kelly greeted him warmly with a hug, and they both sat down, the cameras catching a moment of genuine friendliness between them. It looked like an easy, fun talk about his tour, his comedy, and life in the spotlight. Kelly began by congratulating him on his successful tour, asking how it felt to still fill massive venues after so many years. Jeff replied with his usual mix of humor and humility, joking about never expecting such a long career built around talking to dolls. The crowd laughed. Everything seemed fine. But then something shifted. Kelly's questions started to carry a different tone. She asked if he felt the world had changed around him while his act stayed the same. The question sounded casual, but there was a hint of challenge behind it. Jeff noticed immediately. His smile tightened, but he answered carefully, saying comedy was about laughter, not keeping up with trends. Kelly nodded, but pressed further. She asked if he ever worried about offending people now that audiences had become more sensitive. The word sensitive lingered in the air. Jeff leaned back slightly, his tone cooling. He said comedy had always been about pushing limits and that if comedians feared offending anyone, comedy would die. Some in the crowd clapped, others stayed quiet. Kelly's expression stiffened for a moment, then she calmly asked if there was a difference between pushing boundaries and being insensitive. If maybe some jokes were less bold and more outdated. Jeff straightened in his chair, asking what she meant. His voice was calm but edged with tension. Kelly didn't flinch. She said some comedians hide behind the idea of edginess to excuse lazy stereotypes, and that not everything labeled as a joke should be. Jeff laughed shortly, without humor, and said it sounded like she brought him there to lecture him. The audience gasped. Kelly's smile vanished. She leaned forward and said she respected his success but believed anyone with a platform had a duty to consider the impact of their words. Jeff shot back that responsibility was just another name for censorship, that worrying about pleasing everyone ruined comedy. Kelly replied firmly that caring about others wasn't censorship. It was decency. The room was silent. Jeff leaned forward, his voice rising. He said comedy was about truth, about saying what others were afraid to say. His puppets, he argued, revealed truths people recognized. He added that if Kelly didn't get that, maybe she didn't understand comedy at all. That comment hit hard. Kelly's face flushed. She said she knew comedy well enough to know the difference between clever and cruel humor, and that hiding behind puppets didn't make offensive jokes acceptable. Jeff stood suddenly, red-faced. The crowd gasped again. Kelly stayed seated, meeting his stare. Jeff pointed at her, saying he'd earned his place in comedy and didn't need advice from someone who made a career out of being nice. Kelly rose too, saying being kind wasn't weakness, and that longevity didn't always mean quality. Jeff scoffed that this was what was wrong with people like her, always preaching, always policing others. Kelly replied that holding people accountable wasn't policing, it was expecting growth. The tension was unbearable. Jeff looked around, then accused her of ambushing him on live TV. Kelly said she'd simply asked honest questions, and if he couldn't handle them, maybe he wasn't as confident as he claimed. That was it. Jeff grabbed his puppet case, said the conversation was a waste of time, and started to leave. Kelly called after him, asking if he was really walking out just because someone disagreed. Jeff stopped and turned. He said the difference between them was that he made people laugh while she made people feel good, and that one of those required real talent. The studio went dead silent before exploding with gasps and uneasy laughter. Kelly froze, visibly shaken. Then anger replaced her shock. She called out, saying talent was more than making people laugh. It was about connection and lifting others up, not tearing them down. Jeff paused, facing away, then turned back slowly. His expression had softened slightly, frustration mixed with something almost vulnerable. He said he'd been connecting with audiences for decades, that his fans appreciated his honesty, and that they laughed because they recognized the truth in his jokes. Kelly shook her head, saying that mocking people wasn't brave, it was lazy, and that real comedy made people think, not just agree. Jeff's voice rose again. He said she lived in a bubble where everything was safe and boring, and that she didn't know what real risk in art looked like. Kelly shot back that at least she performed as herself, not through puppets. Jeff snapped that his characters were parts of him, reflections of human nature, and that if she couldn't understand that, it wasn't his fault. The audience was restless, the producers scrambling. Kelly's voice cut through the chaos. She said his puppets weren't mirrors, they were easy targets. Jeff countered that her idea of punching down was just a tool to control what could be said. He said comedy had no limits, and that rules turned art into propaganda. Kelly answered that art without empathy was chaos, and that words mattered. Jeff shook his head, saying kindness was just weakness, and the industry was full of fakes. Kelly replied quietly that honesty without compassion was cruelty, and that maybe he'd performed so long he'd forgotten what being real meant. That hit hard. Jeff went silent for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. He said she didn't know his struggles and that she'd had success handed to her. Kelly's face hardened. She said nothing had been handed to her and that this wasn't about fame. It was about using influence responsibly. Jeff rolled his eyes, saying influence was meaningless, that he just wanted to make people laugh. Kelly stepped closer, saying that when millions listened to you, your words mattered. Jeff said everyone was too sensitive now, that comedy had become a minefield. Kelly answered that she wasn't trying to cancel him, only asking for awareness. Jeff said harm was subjective, that pleasing everyone meant mediocrity. Kelly said she wasn't asking him to please everyone, only to consider everyone, and if he couldn't, maybe he didn't deserve his platform. The silence after that was heavy. Jeff looked at her, picked up his puppet case again, and said he was done. That he came for an interview, not a moral debate. Kelly said it was only a debate if he had something to hide. Jeff said he didn't feel guilty for making people laugh and that he'd keep doing what he did best. Kelly replied softly that laughter and kindness could coexist. He didn't answer. He walked out, this time for good. Kelly stood watching him go, breathing hard. The audience sat frozen. After a moment, she faced them, her expression tight but calm. She said what had just happened wasn't planned, but real conversations sometimes got heated. She said she believed in having tough discussions, that laughter mattered, but so did empathy. She didn't regret what she said. The crowd slowly began to clap, their applause growing louder. Backstage, Jeff stormed through the hallways, ignoring staff. He climbed into his car, slammed the door, and stared out the window, anger mixing with regret. Watching clips later, he saw himself walk off, and it looked different. Both had been stubborn. Both had refused to listen. Back in her dressing room, Kelly sat quietly, shaking slightly. She'd hosted hundreds of shows, but nothing like this. She hadn't meant for it to spiral. It just did. The cameras caught the fight, but not the reflection that followed. Maybe that was the real story. That even when we're sure we're right, there's always a voice whispering that it might be more complicated. So what do you think? Was Kelly right to challenge Jeff, or did she go too far? Should Jeff have stayed to finish the conversation? Or was walking off the only way to save his pride? Share your thoughts below, and if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe so you never miss what happens next.